Stewardship means management. It means you've been entrusted with something. And for all of you, it's your life and everything that you have responsibility for in your life. You're entrusted with it. And you are actually the one that is called to steward it, to manage it. And you get to choose how you do that and not have other people do it for you. Because if you don't choose, other people will choose. And the reason that tithing is part of stewardship is because tithing is saying, I'm going to take the first part of my income, I'm going to put it in the first place. Because God is the most important thing in my heart, my money's going to go to God first. See, that's why Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Because our heart always goes with our money. So if you aren't tithing, it's probably a good indication that God is not at the center of your heart. Because otherwise, you would be ordering your life from the inside out, starting with God and what he says. And so it's not a shame thing, it's just an indication thing to go, oh, I wonder what's at the center of my heart. Well, ask yourself, what is it that keeps you from tithing? Or what is it that keeps you from trusting God? What is it that keeps you from putting God at the center of your heart? Maybe that's the thing you've got in there. And you might need to demote it. Whatever that thing is, you might need to demote it to a lower level. Same thing with this number one. Once you've made the big yes, and for me, I made the big yes to God when I was 13 years old at a summer camp, like Brick was talking about. I went to a camp, I had grown up in church, I had heard about God, I had known the gospel my whole life, but it was at a camp that God got a hold of my heart, and I said, yes, I want Jesus in my life. I want you to come in and be at the center of my life. And from there, that yes has directed the course of my life. Because everything else that I've done, and with a bunch of variations because I didn't live consistently with that yes, right? See, because when I say yes to Jesus, that means I'm saying no to all kinds of other things. And then I made another yes. I said yes to a woman. Well, she was really a girl at the time. My wife, Tracy, I said yes to her. And that yes to her was a no to every other woman in the world, right? Because every yes you say is a no to something else. You realize that. And part of the problem is we forget the yeses that we've already said and we start, just living as if we haven't made any yeses. But if you've already got a yes to Jesus, you got to live from that. If you already got a yes to a spouse, you got to live from that. And those things work their way out. And they affect every area of your life. For Jesus, it was John was at the center. But for most of you that get married, he wasn't married, it'll probably be a spouse. Because there's really only room for one person to be that high priest in your life. For one person to come close to you. You don't need a high priest anymore because God lives himself in you. But one person that gets that close, that gets that access, and it should be your spouse. For some of you, your spouse has never gotten into this little category because your mom's still sitting in there. And I say this to some of you men and some of you women. Your mom is still sitting in there, it's not good. See, the Bible says that you need to leave. That a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. If you're still having your mom at that closest relationship to you, it's going to be a problem. It's going to ruin your marriage. It's not healthy. And you moms need to realize this too. When your kids go away, you need to make sure that they leave and cleave to their spouse because it's not healthy for them to still have you as their closest friend. It's just not. And if you've had another person in there, like when you're not married, you can have a very close friend that's at that spot. And that person, if you are going to get married, needs to get demoted because it needs to be that one person that's the closest to you is your spouse. For some of you that have been divorced, you had a person in here. And you've had to move them, maybe demote them way out here to the unsafe level, like where like ISIS, right? Like you can still keep your love on toward ISIS people and whatever, but you're not going to let them in your house, okay? And you may need to do that. There may be people that are totally unsafe and you have to have such a border, such a boundary that you just keep them at arm's length and you love them from a distance and you pray for them. But the person that's in here, some of you that got divorced, you were lonely, and so you let one of your kids in here. It's okay for a while that you put the kids in there, but ultimately, I hear people talk about this all the time. I got married, I got married a long time ago, but I marry people, that have been divorced and they want to say stuff like, oh, but my kids are always going to be number one, so I got to keep my kids number one. Let me just tell you, that's a recipe for disaster. Do not keep your kids number one. In fact, you can, just don't get married. If you're going to keep your kids number one, don't get married. Because if you get married, you are saying yes to a spouse in a way that makes you have to move the kids out to this next level. And the kids could be at this level, and that's a good spot to be. It's not bad. But I tell couples when I marry them that, listen, like nothing will give your kids more security than when they know that you are committed to each other more. When you are committed to each other first and foremost. My dad taught me this early in life, because when I do stuff like I'd talk back to my mom or whatever, my dad would go, look, he goes, I chose your mom and I loved her before I ever loved you. He goes, and I brought you into this world, I can take you out. And I go, all right. And I got the picture, like, don't mess with mama, because mom was most important to him. And it gave me security because I knew my place. And I knew where I fit in the pecking order, and that's a good thing. Because you have room here for one, you have room here for a few more. Maybe it's not 3 is the exact number, but whatever the amount is. And you've got to choose from here on out where your yeses are. Some of you guys have put your work in this spot where your wife should be. Where that's the most important relationship. And maybe you've got your work even in the God spot. There's a lot of guys that do that. Their work is everything and it gets all consuming and it gets into their God spot. Your work should not be your God. It will destroy you. Because if it goes away, if you put anything in that God spot that can be taken away from you, that's a really insecure place to live. Because when that foundation gets pulled out, your work can go away. A person you put in that spot can die. A relationship you put in that spot could fall apart. Only God is the thing secure enough and steady enough and always consistent enough. Only his love is strong enough to fill that need in your heart. And everything else you do can flow from there. So now I'm coming to this most important relationship from a place of strength because God has filled me up and I have a resource of his love and I'm so connected to him that I can bring his love to my wife. And then out of the strength of that relationship, we can minister to the family and we can work together with our friends and with our ministry and with all of the other places in your life. You can work those things out, but you got to get it in the right order.